Thank you, Wendy. So the genesis of this webinar is the fact that the NIST framework is almost live in a couple of months. It's certainly been 5 years. It's been over 5.5 years since President Obama's executive order which called for development of a federal cybersecurity framework by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And as it notes here, it was released in February of 2014. So we're in another few months. It's going to be 5 years old. So it's been around for a while. NIST recently released version 1.1, and so the question would be: is this thing working? What is it? Has it had any impact? So that's what that's what the focus of this webinar is going to be. Oops, I clicked the right button here. There we are. So today we're going to do a little bit of recap on the cybersecurity framework, and for people who may not be deeply familiar with it, we'll sort of go over a little bit of what was in version 1, what were sort of the features and capabilities that they put into the framework, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at who's using it, what people have been doing with it, kind of how it's being applied. Then we're going to look a bit at version 1.1, and then as I was finishing the slides up, the White House issued a national cybersecurity strategy. So I put that in here. And then we'll have a couple slides of wrap up. One other thing of note is that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is sort of interesting. I'm doing this cybersecurity webinar in October. Cybersecurity Awareness Month was created in 2004 by the Department of Homeland Security. It's a sort of a public reminder to people about cybersecurity and the internet and being aware of things like that. So without any further intro, so the history of the framework: in February 2013, executive order, you can see the number there, 13636, was issued by President Obama and called for a security framework to reduce cyber risk to critical infrastructure. So the focus at the time was critical infrastructure, and the systems and other kinds of infrastructure like power lines in the grid that are required to keep the country running. And the executive order expected or set the expectation that NIST would come out in a year with the first version. And I think there was some skepticism at the time if the government could get anything done in a year, and lo and behold, they did. February 14, 2014, they released version 1. Then there's been some other sort of supporting things that have happened. In the end of 2014, Congress passed the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, and we'll see a little bit about that later, which basically put some legal basis behind some of the authority or directives that had been in the executive order. In January 2017, part of the executive order was that the framework had to be revised and updated periodically as needed. So in January 2017, NIST released a review draft of version 1.1. They had conducted an RFP process before that for people to comment on what they thought about the framework and their experiences in using that. And NIST had used that whole RFP process during the development of the framework, plus having a series of public workshops where people could come in and they would could debate various aspects of what was being proposed. So in April of this year, version 1.1 was officially released. So what was interesting about the executive order back in 2013 is that at the time it established what looked like a new paradigm for the federal government. They were mandating a risk-based approach to managing cybersecurity, and also it was focusing on resiliency. And for federal agencies, it was mandated. So if you were, obviously in the federal government, but it was not to be required of private industry or state governments. But one other thing that it did was at the time there were a bunch of different approaches to cybersecurity. COVID, the COVID people, they had some recommendations for cybersecurity. ISO 27000 had recommendations for cybersecurity. The federal government had recommendations for cybersecurity. So they had all these apparently disparate things, and so the idea was how can they do something to reconcile or harmonize these. So why was NIST involved? NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and then they have the requirement for under the federal law, FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Management Act. They're assigned responsibility for cybersecurity standards, guidelines, you can see your methods, etc., for the federal government. So they have the mantle to do that. And also the Patriot Act also assigned them some responsibility in the Homeland Security area. And they've got a couple of websites here. The Computer Security Resource Center has a lot of information, and they now have another portal for the framework since it's become such a large part of what they're doing. So we mentioned this Cybersecurity Enhancement Act. So that was passed in December, and it was, I don't know if it was a surprise, but part of the reason President Obama created the executive order was that Congress really wasn't agreeing on any kind of action that could be taken for cybersecurity, at sort of at the national level, and there are all these debates about privacy and issues like that, and so the executive order sort of attempted to just push through some of that and get something in place. And the executive order called for voluntary framework, working with the private sector. So the Enhancement Act actually codified that and said that provided legal support, saying that NIST was assigned to do this work with a public-private partnership to work on cybersecurity, also to support research and development, workforce development, public awareness, preparedness, etc. So this sort of put some legal backing behind some of the directives in the executive order. There are some other cybersecurity provisions passed at the same time. I don't have time here to go through those all, but they were more on the order of information sharing and things like that. So here's the five. There are five titles. I'm not going to read all of this, but they talked about. So one address the collaboration aspect, so part of, and we'll see the NCCOE is a partnership organization that NIST supports that addresses that. We'll see that extensively in a bit. Also, the focus on cybersecurity research and development. In terms of the federal government, network security, automation, checklists for government systems, so how to doing assessment, and also it interestingly allowed authorized NIST to do what's called intramural cybersecurity research and development. So this actually sort of really gave them the impetus, like the Center of Cybersecurity Excellence. So now they have the legal authority to start doing